Chapter 10. "Why are you teaching me this?" Robbie asked for the dozenth time, panting against the stable wall and holding the bronze sword. Brazen answered as she always did, "It is your destiny." Robbie rolled his eyes and returned the sword to its scabbard. "What destiny requires a son of a peasant farmer to know how to use a sword?" The horse didn't answer, as Robbie knew she wouldn't. Since Letha, Robbie had slept at the forest stable, but the bronze mare was driving him mad by endlessly repeating the same nonsense. He shivered as he walked down to the stream to bathe in the water. The nights were getting steadily colder. He stared up at the stars and thought about Milady. Does she even remember me? He shook his head, knowing the answer. Why would she? Still, he fell asleep with the memory of her kiss on his cheek. The next morning he returned to the farm to help care for the stock. He spent a long time with Thunder. The mare was pregnant again. She'd nearly lost her last foal and wasn't having an easier time with this one. She shouldn't have been bred so soon. He'd tried to tell his father this, but Angus wouldn't listen. Mist watched Robbie shivering in front of her fire, glaring at his too small clothes. They'd never do for the winter that wasn't long away. She'd pointed this out to him before, but he said he'd rather freeze than beg for new ones. "Enough of this nonsense. You need decent clothes. If your father's going to use you like a servant, you should demand to be paid like one. Your mother would never stand for you being neglected like this." "Maybe, but my mother's dead, isn't she? If she hadn't wanted me to have a brute as a father, she shouldn't have married one." "Don't you dare judge your mother. You have no idea what she went through." "No, I don't. No one will talk about her, not even you." Mist opened her mouth to protest, but realized she did change the subject whenever Robbie brought up Donella. "Your mother's story isn't a pretty one." Robbie met her eyes. "Neither is mine." Mist turned away, not able to face the young man who looked at her through Donella's eyes. She busied herself making tea and setting out the cake Robbie liked so much. Why would she have a name like Donella if she came from far away? It's a Cortlandian name. Mist took as long as possible filling the cream pitcher and finding the honey on the shelf. She knew Robbie didn't like tea much, but she hadn't Biat to offer him. Donella wasn't her given name. It was something very long, with very few vowels in it. Spitzgrita or some such thing. I never could pronounce it. Neither could Angus. He's the one who started calling her Donella. She thought it was sweet when she found out what it meant. Elfin girl. Robbie snorted in disbelief. Sweet wasn't a term she'd use for Angus either, but Donella often had. He might have been a different man if she'd lived. "But how did she meet my father?" Robbie asked. "There certainly isn't anyone around here who looks like me. My father only goes to Mortagen once per year to sell the harvest." "He's gone now, isn't he?" Mist asked, putting the cream and the honey on the table. Robbie nodded as he added generous amounts of both to his tea. "Your mother used to do that too. I told her I might as well simply serve her honeyed cream to begin with." Robbie looked her straight in the eyes. "Mistress, she's my mother. I deserve to know." Miss sighed and sat down. "I guess you do. Your mother was younger than you when she was kidnapped from her native land and brought to Mortagen with a lot of other young girls to be sold to the brothels. Even though slavery has long been illegal, King Solar has never been able to completely stamp it out. Your father saw her at the auction and bought her. She was always grateful to Angus for saving her from the brothels." She looked away again, not able to meet the shock and anger in Robbie's eyes. "My father purchased my mother like a cow? How dare you pretend to have loved her?" "We had our fair share of arguments on the subject. I told her she didn't have to stay with Angus. He didn't legally own her. But your mother would never hear anything against him. She claimed his love for her was real. In your father's defense, he did marry her before he touched her. She was completely alone and vulnerable. He had no need to make her his legal wife." Robbie's hands formed fists. "I'll kill him." The depths of his rage almost frightened her. "Your mother never felt a desire for revenge against your father, and even I think killing him is taking things a little too far. But you shouldn't allow him to treat you the way he does. My child, you're a strong and talented Amahealer. You can easily support yourself without your father's money. He needs you far more than you need him." Robbie watched from the bunkhouse window as his father and brother drove in from Mortagen. He watched the hands take care of the wagon and the horses, and his father and brother head for the house and the noon meal. "I won't be treated like dirt by a man who thinks a wife can be bought like an animal." He hurried towards the house before he could change his mind. For the first time since he'd moved his meager possessions out, Robbie opened the front door and walked in. His father and Boyden were talking at the dining room table. Conversation stopped abruptly. "To what do we owe the pleasure of this visit?" his father demanded. Robbie took a deep breath. "I've come to inform you I expect to be paid with the rest of the hands in the morning." His father leaned back and folded his arms. "Have you?" Robbie looked at his father's hands, the ones that had so often hit him, and thought of them touching his mother. He allowed the rage to mount within him to combat the fear. "You reduced me to the status of a farmhand long ago. Now you will pay me, or I will do what any farmhand would do in my position." His father laughed derisively. "Just who do you think will hire you, boy? Most around here think you're a demon. Now get out of here before I give you the beating you so richly deserve." Robbie clenched his fist and fought to keep his voice from trembling. "They may think me a demon, but even now they pay for my services. I can live well enough without you. You will pay me, or you will find someone else to care for your animals." Angus jumped to his feet and slapped Robbie across the face, knocking him to the ground. "Damn you, boy! I won't take this from Boyden, and by the 7 hells I won't take it from you." Robbie tasted blood in his mouth as he slowly got to his feet. He looked his father in the eyes, allowing his hatred of the old man to fill them. "Tomorrow morning I'll line up with the rest of the hands to receive my wages. You can pay me the 20 tetra and do experienced hands, or you can watch me right away. If you ever hit me again, I will leave." Robbie turned his back on his father. "I won't be dictated to. Come back here, damn you!" his father yelled after him. Robbie ignored the shouts and headed for the bunkhouse. He half expected Boyden to intercept him and drag him back into the house for the worst beating he'd ever received from his father. But he reached the bunkhouse unscathed and collapsed on his bunk, shaking with the after-effects of fear and rage. Next morning, Robbie awoke sick to his stomach. His father would view his actions as treason, and he couldn't imagine Angus letting him get away with it. His back ached with remembered pain, and his mouth grew dry as he imagined Boyden holding him to the dining room table. "Will I even be able to walk when he's through with me?" But even as he imagined the beating, he knew he wouldn't take back what he'd done yesterday. He would be treated as a human being. If his father did beat him today, it would be for the last time. When his father came out of the house carrying the sack of coin, Robbie lined up with the others. His father didn't look at him, as one by one the men stepped up and received their pay. When Robbie reached the front of the line, his father counted out 20 tetra, but he didn't push them to Robbie's side of the table. "If you choose to be no more than a hired hand, reach across and take your money," Angus said. "But if you do so, you'll be my son no longer." Anger flared inside Robbie, allowing him to keep his voice steady. "When have you ever treated me like a son?" He swept the coins into his hand and returned to the bunkhouse. But as Robbie sat on his bunk looking at the coins, he didn't feel the triumph he'd expected. A part of him had always believed that someday his father would change, that one day he'd look into his father's eyes and see them shining with love and pride. As Robbie looked at the coins, he realized that day would never come. He blinked quickly to rid his eyes of tears. He wasn't going to cry like a baby. He took an old pair of trousers, cut a large piece of cloth from them, and put the coins inside. He gathered it up into a makeshift purse and tied the top closed with a strip of leather. He then put the coins in his pocket and headed to the barn to saddle Wild Thing. The small village of Valley Fair was only a few miles away, and Robbie reached it before mid-morning. He'd rarely been there, and never alone. He ignored those who stared at him or drew the Star of Sulis as he went by, and bought the things he needed. When Robbie rode out of town, his grumbling stomach reminded him he'd had nothing to eat that day. He hoped he'd arrive at Mist's cottage in time for lunch. Before Mist would feed him, she made him tell her what happened with his father, bring in his purchases, and show them to her. She fussed over him and had him change into a set of his new clothes. Robbie was uncomfortable with all the fuss, but a part of him was pleased by it. He'd never had anyone who cared enough about him to fuss over him before. When he was properly dressed, he looked at his reflection in the shining pot over the fireplace. For the first time, he didn't see a demon-cursed runt. Instead, he saw something of the young man Milady had wanted to spend time with. Through the fabric of his new shirt, he fingered the ribbon that hung around his neck. Miss echoed his thoughts. "You look quite grown up. You have your mother's eyes. I always found their color stunning." "That's what Milady said." The herb witch's face darkened. "Robbie, do you realize Realize what? He snapped. That she's out of my class? That I'll never see her again? What kind of fool do you think I am? Miss shook her head sadly. My child, I just don't want to see you hurt. Boyden is the one that hurt me that day, not my lady.